Hey everyone, so today in today's presentation, we're going to be talking about a theory of how we organize these memories that we have, how we organize the information we obtain and acquire about the world. And this is called schema theory. So a schema is a cognitive framework in which we structure information about the physical world and the events and behavior that occur within it. And oftentimes knowledge becomes stored within memory in an organized way so that future events could become perceived much more efficiently, I should say. Oftentimes this does not require conscious thought and is a largely automatic process. And there's a few benefits to this. The biggest one is that it reduces cognitive energy. Uh, if we had to, if our memories were unorganized and we had to quickly think of an answer to something, it would take a lot more brain power for our brains to find that information. And that sort of energy we don't have. We want to spend that on other resources. And so this really helps to make our brains much more efficient. But on the other hand, it does create biases in cognitive processes. And we're going to see a few studies that are like that today. So it does create biases in thinking, perception, memory, and then it also limits accuracy of events in accurate ways. And we'll talk about how that does that today. So if you quickly just read the screen. All right, now that you've done that, I'm sure the first time that you read it, you probably had to go back and read the second "the" in Paris in the spring. And this is just emblematic of schema theory because our schemas for how sentences are set up in our brain are not designed to read this extra "the." Oftentimes when we read, we are reading based on educated guesses that we think is going to happen. And our brains oftentimes will skip over certain words like in or the because we know they're going to be there. And our schemas and our memories have been so attuned and so rehearsed for this particular moment that when something is different, oftentimes we skip right over it. Our minds fill in the blanks to what is going on. So again, coming off of that little exercise, our minds tell us what it wants to see. It's based on our previous experiences of language, of memory, all these different things. And it has create ready-made schemas of information. It does allow us to encode material that can affect the retrieval of information. If we have put false narratives in our schemas, we are much more likely to think that those are true, like stereotypes, like how we think of the world is impacted by the ways in which we have organized and encoded information. And so based on the schema a concept is tied to, it could affect how we learn the concept when presented with new information. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that processing in the next video with top-down and bottom-up processing. But the schema and the levels of analysis, it's been well-founded across a couple different levels of analysis. So first, it is biologically based in terms of how our brain organizes information, but it does have cognitive implications because it affects the ways in which we store, we retrieve, we encode information. And then it is also socioculturally based. Oftentimes the ways in which we view the world is based on our culture and the ways in which we've been taught and the norms that we've been taught. And so how we view the world and how we organize information about the world oftentimes is tied to those markers and to those experiences. So here we are seeing how a schema might look. Oftentimes, when you think about how we have sort of visualized schemas, it's much more of this uh, web quality. And oftentimes we don't think about how detailed our schemas, even for something like eggs, could be. So you have here that it's tied to supermarkets, tied to different colors, different sizes. You think of birds, you think of nests. They are laid in nests, and then there's all these different concepts that are tied to that. Before, I'm sure a lot of us have sort of thought of memory as being in a filing cabinet, sort of like a SpongeBob cartoon, when he's sort of melting down because he has to think of something. And there's all these cabinets and papers flying around. That's not actually how our brain thinks of it at all. And oftentimes you can think of this, if you're thinking of something and then something random pops into your head, that's much more likely a cause of something within what you're thinking about pulling up that schema, and some memory is tied to the original memory you were thinking of for some reason. And so that sort of gives credence to the idea of these schemas. Here's another one for a schema map for a picnic, much less detailed than our one for eggs, but showing the same thing nonetheless. All right, the first study that we're going to look at here is shows a lot of evidence for the negative side of schema theory and the negative side of what a schema can do to our line of thinking. So this is Allport and Postman from 1947, and the aim was to see how does schema theory impact our memory and recall. And so what they did was that they took participants and they quickly showed them a picture of a black man and a white man arguing, and the white man was brandishing a knife. And participants were quickly shown this picture, and then it was taken away, and they were asked to describe the details of the picture. And the results were pretty alarming, and still are today, because I don't know that it would be, sadly, totally different in terms of the results. And so on recall, many participants remembered the black man holding the knife. Right, so they've sort of switched around who was the aggressor in the situation. And, black was sort of orientated towards violence. There were a lot of stereotypes within culture that black people were more violent. And so people in these cases sort of switched around who is aggressor to fit their experiences of the world, no matter how wrong those experiences were, no matter how ignorant those experiences were. That's how their brains sort of viewed these pictures. And so the conclusion was that schema theory in fact impacts memory. Our memories are not all the way accurate. And societal stereotypes, prejudices impact individual thinking, schema formation, and memory. And you want to think about like the implications of something like this happening. What if this was, someone being investigated for a crime, and suddenly the wrong person is put on trial for this crime and possibly convicted? Now, there is a limitation to this. The drawing is hard to see and is unclear, especially when only being able to see it quickly. I'm going to show the picture here in just a second. So here's the picture. And I don't know if you can see this, but the knife is right here. Okay. And like I said, what would often happen in the experiment was the knife would switch hands from the white person to the black person. So, as Allport and Postman showed, stereotypes matter. And they matter especially when considering that it impacts the schemas that we have and the organization of our schemas. Past experiences, again, even if they are not, even if those past experiences were wrong, I should say, those can cloud our judgment. Those can cloud our perception of current events and for current experiences. They change the ways in which we view the world, and it's in an effort to make our world more efficient. But as we've often said, making the world more simplistic does not make it more accurate. And schemas, in terms of how they affect memory, they affect us at two different stages of memory. The first one is encoding. So how we encode information and take in information may be based on experiences happening at the same time or prior memories and concepts. And then retrieval, the cue that leads to us remembering certain things is often tied to the schemas in which they are in. The second study we're going to look at here today is Bransford and Johnson. And the aim of this one was to investigate the effect of context on comprehension and memory of text passages. This is a study that we've talked about before. I've also mentioned that this is a possible study for your IA. So again, they took 50 male and female high school students, volunteered to participate in the experiment, and they had 5 conditions. They read everyone this passage, but there were 5 conditions off of this. The first one, they gave no contextual picture, and the passage was heard once. Number 2, they were given no contextual picture again, but the passage was heard twice. Number 3, they were given context before, so they were given a picture of what was going on in the passage. Number 4, they were given context after they heard the story. And then number 5, participants were given a context picture prior to hearing the passage, but it only contained elements mentioned in the passage without showing sort of some deeper picture of understanding and how they all work together. So the average recall was about 3.5 to 4 ideas out of 14 for all conditions except for when they were shown the picture before the study. And so that was 8 out of 14 ideas, or double the results of all other conditions. And so this can be explained by schema theory by tying the picture into and sort of queuing up memories so that they could fit the information from the passage much more neatly into their schemas, and that allowed them to be able to remember more of the ideas. And this happens in learning all the time. When I am crafting a lesson, although it's not always successful, I'm trying to think of things that all of you have seen before, right, to at least introduce the lesson. And so if we are tying into past experiences, past memories, we are able to much more strongly learn more information. There are other schema strategies. The first one is pattern recognition. So this is the matching of a current input to information in memory. And then effort after meaning, the attempt to match unfamiliar ideas into a familiar framework. And this will be also tied into our ideas about top-down and bottom-up processing. So in terms of how we think about and evaluate schema theory overall, thinking about schema theory has really evolved over time. It was originally thought to only be used during retrieval, but now we see how much it affects encoding, the encoding process as well. Schema theory has also allowed psychologists to develop a unified theory of cognition that shows how all cognitive processes like thinking, memory, learning, attention work in conjunction with each other. Schemas affect our thinking. Schemas affect our decision making and what we think is happening in the world. And then also it allows psychologists to comprehend how memory errors occur, but how also prejudices arise in the formation of schemas. All right, our brains are often filled with biased thinking. And although we often try to make the correct decision, we are impacted by our past experiences. Those color the ways in which we see the world. And so recognizing those and trying to overcome those to be someone who is fair, is just, is equal, um, you know, is incredibly important. There is a limitation, though. There's a lack of explanation on how schemas are acquired and the process through which they work. Oftentimes, they're hypothetical ideas. There's not necessarily a physical presence like with so many cognitions out there. And then schema theory does aid, though, the understanding of how the mind works and has withstood rigorous testing. Oftentimes, studies like Allport and Postman, but also newer studies, have shown and demonstrated how knowledge is organized within this cognitive framework. And we are working off of something very similar to a schema, if not a schema itself. All right, this last slide you can read over, but it's just a teacup evaluation coming off of the teacup framework. So just sort of more deeply evaluating the schema process. You can read over that. All right, if that's the end of our presentation today, if you have any questions, please let me know, and have a great day.